Welcome to Revive Ministries Podcast. This month we're remembering our lessons, which means many different things for those undergoing change. This month also reminds us in the States of 4th of July, which is the celebration of the passage of the Declaration of Independence by the Continental Congress. But a lot of people don't know, on July 5th, 1775, the Continental Congress adopted the Olive Branch Petition expressing hope for reconciliation with Britain. However, King George refused it and proclaimed the declaration that colonists were at a state of open rebellion. Other things happened in July of note. Apollo 11 lunar landing mission began and lifted off at Kennedy Space Center at 9:37 a.m. And also near and dear to my heart, July 27, 1953, Korean War was ended, and the signing of the armistice that, and that the war lasted 3 years. So many people were separated. It's still unresolved today. Being half Korean, one of the things that is notable is that so many separate families for 74 years ago that it began. And then there's us. We're undergoing change, and the lessons we learn. I do find it's helpful sometimes when we're in the minutia of what we are in. We sometimes forget about what, whether things are, positive or negative, but also what we've learned from them. Today, I have a returning guest. It's been a while. His name is Sebastian Lopez. Thank you so much for coming on and just sharing your insight, having a discussion about remembering our lessons. It seems when I was a kid, lessons didn't seem so something sought after, but as you grow up, you kind of see the value of them. But thank you for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me again. Always a privilege.
Well, a little disclaimer for those, obviously, we do Revive Ministry focus on a lot of times mental health, substance use, but we think about the whole when it comes to wellness. What success for one person is different for everyone. It's very subjective. So I do encourage, if you are struggling, I don't want to like reinventing the wheel, especially working in the mental health field. If it's a church community, reach out to your church family. If it's if it's a bowling team, if it's a chess team, I would encourage you reach
whoever
out to whoever it is. So I always say this, Sebastian. People say it better than me, but there's a Swedish proverb that I want to start off with. It says, "Those who wish to sing always find a song." Interesting. Think about that. And
it's good.
I want to, let's just start there, and then what comes to mind when you hear this proverb from the Swedes?
Yeah, it's kind of like I don't know. The other quote that comes to mind is when the going gets rough, the tough, or when the going gets tough, the tough keep going. Right. So it's like you're gonna find a way. I think of another idea of people seeing the life as a glass half full, right, rather than half empty. So it's like it's interesting. Those who wish to sing always find a song. So there's always going to be a reason for them or a way for them to be able to do what they want to do, right? And I think we've had a lot of conversations on that ability of we try to not pioneer but champion that language in creation life, right? When we do some of these workshops and seminars with our church, and the first night is choice, right? And how important choice is, determination, that like decision, that before you go get up, walk out the door to seek help or go to gym, get up and cook a healthy meal rather than ordering DoorDash. You have to have the decision, that choice to say, hey, I'm going to do this. And so I think of that, those who wish to sing always find the song. There's that choice that, hey, nobody else is singing. There's no tune. I don't want to, I want to sing, but it's like, no, you're always going to find a song to sing. I think that's a powerful quote.
Yeah, for me, I think about music in general, and a lot of times it's so dynamic in nature. Like I could say a phrase or a sentence, but music kind of expresses it further. It moves it along further. And like for me, working in the mental health field, I do find, we think about coping skills of being like breathing techniques or something that's apparently addressing an immediate concern, but there's also idea of passive coping skills that you build through positive habits. I feel a lot of times I encourage people I work with to be creative, and life. A lot of times, what we face in life are problems, and a lot of times they're best
Right.
creatively because your context, your culture is different. And I think what to piggyback that is Steve Jobs. He says this: your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life. Say this because a lot of times we think about. I read that book before Seculosity. Before we went through that, and I that was I liked how he introduced something that a lot of times we don't even talk about. We don't think about.
Right.
He broke it down into different chapters, different ideas. But I also think about a lot of times we gotta slow down and see what we are trying to actually do. And
correct.
And it becomes bad when you're just reacting to life. You're not actually enjoying just reacting to every little instinct. You can't avoid it all the time. But what comes to mind when you see this quote?
I love that, man. The first thing that came to mind, a lot of times it's thinking, oh man, you're trying to, this idea, don't try to be someone else, be yourself, right? But to me, I don't think people struggle with that as much. I think there is that element of like being a chameleon, trying to blend in, especially when you're going through your young age. But even later, right, with your coworkers, maybe with your family, you're trying to be, a son that your parents wanted this type of son, or your people you're around in that group want this type of guy. So you fill out, you're into UFC or this type of football team or whatever it is, right? I'm obviously being stereotypical, but. I think that's the danger more than like you with it yourself not liking who you are. It's more of like sometimes we try to be who other people want us to be. And so obviously I think we see this maybe in our careers. I know I see it in my career a lot where I've had, you have to grow in that because as a pastor, as a leader, everyone has an idea of what a pastor looks like because, especially in our congregation, in our context, everyone's had a pastor. So they're like, the pastor I love did this, and that, right? And so it was, they visited. They were great at speaking and preaching. They counseled. They had great illustrations, man. They had everyone at their house. They paid for and they did mission trips. And, so sometimes you look at it and you break it all down and you say, it would be impossible to fulfill everyone's dream for me, right? And so that's where you have to navigate, I think, reality and the expectations that others have of you, and knowing that you're going to, disappoint people. And I love that Steve Jobs says that, right? And I think his life and the rise of the Apple empire illustrates that, right? He was unorthodox, started in his garage in his house with a vision that nobody believed in. And he had that idea. I think your time is limited. Don't waste it living someone else's life. And I think that's, to me, that speaks of don't waste it living someone else's idea for your life, right? Try to figure out what your purpose is and your plan is and live it out. Don't try to live out what other people want you to do.
And, at a more macro scale, since the 1950s, as I was in the Air Force working on planes, but, people were able to go global. And the thing about that is we're no longer next to our families so closely. But think about that. So that element made a pervasive, I would say, condition that we are all facing in various degrees is loneliness. Loneliness is more seated deep because before, our families will be like kind of close, like cousins there, uncles there. Now you're out in about.
You're by yourself.
You're by yourself. Yeah. So it's and we're in somewhat convenience culture. So like a lot of times when you buy things, it's either convenience based, like the tier structure of what you can get. And the thing about that is we try to, at times, at least from my perspective, we try to artificially create certainty in a box that we're comfortable with. So I always kind of ask the question, especially working with some of the people who are really struggling. I ask them, "Are you allowed to get better?" Kind of interesting to say that because
that's true.
A lot of times we ourselves can be our own barriers moving forward. I think Jim Carrey said it recently or last year. I don't know. I really love this quote. He says, if if you unable to downgrade your life for 1 year, you care too much what other people think. So a lot of times, we think, oh, I need to be this, I need to get that, but we never ask the question, why do we need to get that? Why do we have to get there? And am I allowed to get better? Because I can't be better and not rest. I can't be better and take the time to get better. So it's like, it's one of those things like you're mentioning as a pastor. And, as in the mental health field, I have endless referrals that will never, ever end. At the same time, you're trying to help what you can. And, context, and that's another thing, is hugely, very important. How we support and how we describe our attachment level and type. We have different types of attachments. How we attach ourselves to other people can be familiar, can be comfortable, and you probably see this in the church setting. But even though it's comfortable and familiar, doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, so I want to, just want to, thinking about last month, and I mentioned Korea a little bit in the beginning because Korea, unfortunately, Korea has the highest rate of suicide in the whole world at this moment. So,
is that for across both countries, or
the whole entire world?
The whole. But I'm saying like North Korea, South Korea,
just South Korea.
We don't know.
We don't know enough
the numbers of North Korea.
Yeah, we don't know.
Yeah.
So
okay. Wow, that's crazy.
But it's there've been talk about it, and a lot of times it's just there's generational gaps, and you see that in most cultures. But the big generational gap in Korea, at least what I've read and what I've noticed, is my grandparents. Like in Korea we call it harmony, harabaji, as grandfather, grandma, because when they were brought up during the Korean War, around that time, they were a third world country. They were not like now they're a first world country. So with that said, it's almost like a 300-year difference of ideology on how we think. So there's a lot of friction, and how Korea is almost moving too fast for it to know what it is yet. And that actually, there was a survey done. My wife Joanne told me about it, but I read it too. It said that they did random countries, and they asked them, what's the number one thing that is important to you? And most of them said family. Korea said materialism.
Interesting.
And Korea is very family oriented, but I'm saying in a general sense. Obviously, not every family is this way. But I would say there's a lot of obligations. Like every family, every culture, every context, there's different things that would be weird for other, but it became that. And I'm just making this note, obviously, just because it's near and dear to my heart, and I'm hoping that there is some area where there can be some sort of move towards reconciliation, some sort of addressing of this matter, but also just understanding the context. Because like this, what I said, context is important. In the military, we think about courage, I will die for you, those kind of things. We see that a lot in that verbiage in the Bible in some ways. But I feel that this quote really cuts deep, especially in the context of where we're at right now. If you want to show me that you really love me, don't say that you want to die for me. Instead, stay alive. So I'm like, sometimes the most courageous thing, is to stay alive.
Stay alive. Yeah.
Just to go that next day.
Right. No, that's good. You shared a lot there and to unpack. I mean, going back a little bit to that idea of sometimes the trap or the lie we believe that we have to kind of be like a Superman, right? Or superhero to help everyone. And that's where you and different, especially if you're in like a health, in a, what's the term of those jobs? Where you're serving other people, right? Where you're engaged with helping other people, whatever it is, with therapy, counseling, medical field, all that, pastoral work. There's that feeling that you have to be Superman and be there for everyone and be there to hear everyone's call. And the reality is we can't, right? And if we try to step into that role as Clark Kent, we end up causing more damage for others and ourselves, right? So it's important to have those limitations, but it's hard in a broken world where there's so much, right? And you're like, there's not enough time, there's not enough energy that I have, there's not enough resources and people to be able to address and help everything there. But that's a big problem, issue there. I think that's where helping form a community where people are thinking the same way of wanting to help others helps. But yeah, I think even going to what you're talking about, Korea there with generations, I think it's interesting to see. Obviously, I'm not as familiar as to all that's going on there, but it's fascinating, like you're saying, right? Just the different generations and what they faced and what was important to them. Unless you do the hard work of contextualizing, like it'll still remain the same important value today, right? Where it's like, hey, we didn't have much, we were third world, but now we're a first world. We have everything, but we can rethink kind of what our values or needs are. But sometimes if we don't do that thing of, what we would call kind of breaking the generational cycles, and a lot of it is through like therapy and counseling and being with people and like doing that discovery and naming what's going on and bringing about healing. But yeah, if you don't address that, you end up repeating it. I heard this quote once that says, in a religious sense, right, that Jesus can live in your heart, but your grandpa lives in your bones, right? So it's unless you do the work of breaking why my family does this, right? Why do we view this? Why is this our value? Why do we vote this way? Why do we live this way? Why do we talk this way? Really discovering why. And then you begin to name, well, this is why, and then you can change. Unless you do that, you're bound to repeat what you've seen, right? And so that I think is very important. To go about that.
Yeah, and I do. Going on that, I think there's a lot of things we can learn from our basic needs, and I think this Guyanese proverb says it this way. It kind of brings us down to our human sense. Hunger is felt by a slave, and hunger is felt by a king. So there's intrinsic needs that we have, and I do feel some of the I think it was Robin Williams, he said, we learn the most when we're hungry, desperate, at our lowest point. Those are the lessons that are the most significant, when we have I think you mentioned also therapy, counseling, but I also encourage community. One thing that is not created enough is community. There's a lot of fear, and it's unfortunate because we're saying, we're trying to create a space where it's okay to be not Superman,
to not be okay.
not be okay, to not have everything done or perfect. And there's kind of a lightness when you realize this, because you realize that I'm allowed. I'm allowed to get better. I'm allowed to be human. It's not all on me, and I'm learning and discovering, and that's why this month was, I think, really near and dear for me, because we could go through and be like checking off a lot of things, and I ask people like, "Are you allowed to get better?" It sounds so to say, it's like, and it sounds so like, what do you mean? I'm here, I'm doing all this stuff, but it's more about the intangible, the creativity. There was a moment when we were kids, when we raised our hands, who was the best dancer? Everyone was. The best singer. Everyone was. But on switching gears to a more somber note, if you don't give time to yourself to heal, I think of C.S. Lewis. He said it in the Grief Observed. He wrote this book, and he wrote this quote. He says, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear. I'm not afraid, but the sensation is being afraid of the sensation is like being afraid. The same fluttering in my stomach, the same restlessness, the same yawning. I keep on swallowing." It's just a kind of excerpt.
Very sobering.
Sobering of how. And not only just like what Steve Jobs, but how we kind of sometimes try to blind ourselves and try to create these artificial certainties that actually can be our barriers to connecting with, or connecting, or being forgiving to ourselves and our shortcomings, or our abilities, or what we're not able to do. I want to. I know I always give people a moment. I know we talked a lot and we condensed a lot, but I want to give you a moment if you want. People haven't heard from you for a while. You've been. Is there anything you want to share? Any updates? I know there's one, but I won't say it for you. But anything you want to update?
Yeah. I think So big update. We've a lot has happened this last. I don't think we've been on the podcast this 2024, right? So it's awesome to be back. But yeah, since last time, we have transitioned and worked. We're working now in Jacksonville with a church here in Jacksonville where I'm pastoring, south side of Jacksonville area, and so it's been exciting. We started here in January, and at the same time moved up. We're living in St. Augustine, and if that's not enough, we're actually pregnant and expecting a baby in about almost a month now. So it's just crazy. A lot of things going on, a lot of changes, but it's been. I think with every phase of life, Rob, we talked about it a lot. You go through different phases, right? And so it's kind of like playing Super Mario or Pac-Man or any game, right? And I'm obviously talking about older games, but Call of Duty, any game where you have levels and you fight the villain in that level, you get to the next level and you're like, oh, okay, so I have to kind of take with the lessons I learned, right, the skills in this video game, and now apply it, and now I'm gonna have to learn a new thing to be able to beat this level and move on. So that's what it looks like now. Life kind of throws you curveballs, and you feel everything's good, and then it's just like, wow, and you're adapting again. And I think that's just the human experience. Like you said, we're all human. I think of that song, like we all bleed the same, right? And if we were able to have, first of all, more empathy and more grace with others and with ourselves, right? And that's, I think sometimes we're rough. So that's one thing people have told us as first-time parents, to really have grace and be kind to yourself, because you're going to mess up. You're going to do things that you didn't want to do. You're going to mess up. This is going to happen. That's going to happen. You're going to forget. You're going to fall asleep. You're not going to, but it's okay, right? And so it's being aware of that. And I think another thing that I've been trying to do recently with all these changes, just being aware of how I'm feeling. Inside Out 2 just came out, and I love cartoons, and I love how they've been really, really in such a creative way visualizing how our feelings can control us, right? And so as you were talking, I was thinking, I think sometimes the emotions that we're feeling with the situations we're facing, or the feelings we have of anxiety or stress, joy, fear, disgust, jealousy, whatever, looking at them not as a captain to lead us, because sometimes I'm just overwhelmed with joy or overwhelmed with despair or overwhelmed with anxiety, and I'm like, oh, woe is me. But trying to figure out to see them more of as GPS, to see where am I, what's going on, right? Communicate. Okay, I'm it got me thinking, because C.S. Lewis says that grief is kind of like fear, which is very interesting, right? It's kind of does the same feelings in your body physically. So I've been thinking through that, right? When I feel a certain way or whatever, it's just, okay, this is happening. It's real. What do I do with this information? And how do I not let that dictate my next move, right? And in the movie, if you haven't seen Inside Out 2, great movie, they introduced new, more intricate, complex, not intricate, but, as you age, some other emotions that you would feel and other feelings apart from the anger, fear, joy, sadness, right? Now you have anxiety and envy and laziness or whatever, embarrassment. And so you introduce us. So it's really cool as they navigate that, and how maybe one feeling overwhelms the others and tries to take control, and what that looks like as it's played out. So to me, those are the things that I've been kind of thinking of with all the changes we've been going through and are going through, and just being mindful of myself, because that's all I can control, right? I do a pitiful job, but all I can control is how I respond to things, what I do, how do I think, and try navigating my emotions in the midst of it, knowing that I'll have good days and bad days, but helping me to, going back to the beginning, right, trying to move forward. Everyone that wants to sing, there's gonna be people that want to sing, and they'll find a song to sing, right? So trying to have that. So that's kind of been our time right now, with everything going on.
I think a lot of times, it's funny, a lot of times I realize is, we sometimes set off a little bit of a barrier. I remember talking to you recently, months before, and I was entered back into some trauma therapy, and for me, it was the more ambiguous ones. Yes, I had therapy yesterday. I'm like, oh yeah, things are going great. I'm feeling like things are moving, we're progressing, but it's more, when we're kids, when I was younger, we're not led by our emotions. There's this kind of this degrading approach to emotions. Almost like, and I feel like it's just such a missed opportunity. Emotions, shouldn't be something that we're led by, but it's such, it's not a complete sentence. It's like, we should be focused on what is really happening, but we shouldn't ignore our emotions. Ignoring our emotions will only, it's not going to go anywhere. At least for me,
it's not healthy.
It's not healthy, but also it's not. For me, I just remember just noticing that it's not always the big things. It's the little things. A lot of times you talk about emotions. Whenever I meet someone, I always ask them, "Are you suicidal or homicidal?" I ask these things in a safe space, and I ask them for 3 major reasons. This is kind of what I'm floating on. One is there's a thought I've been reading about that when it comes to suicide, that a lot of it stems from burdensomeness. Burdensomeness is one of the major components. So if you feel like a burden, people, and it may be helpful for those who have people who are struggling, understanding, just the rational, the shelter, what they need, all that stuff is great, but one thing that gets lost in mental health, substance use, or anyone who's struggling is dignity. The other thing is it's called thwarted or belongingness, but really it means that there was a moment, let's say, for me that I felt like I belonged, and all of a sudden, because of XYZ, I don't have anyone to talk to. No one wants to contact me. So there's like a big shift. So those are 2 red flags, and the third one is more physical, actually. The third one is fear of death. Naturally, we're predisposed to be afraid of death. So those who attempted suicide, I've attempted suicide. Other people who have or have family members. The problem is that you can't really unseal that. That fear is never there's something
never
that happens.
Gone. Fully.
So it never really kind of heals. So the worry is if the person feels doesn't belong or burden, there usually is more of a delay. But if someone also doesn't have the fear of death, that because they have attempted or they have attempted, that could be just more of a red flag. It's just like if you had some sort of physical diagnosis, but you have to watch out a little bit carefully. Same thing with suicide. So if you notice that, especially that's why we ask the questions. Do you have family members who passed away from completing suicide? Have you attempted suicide? We ask these things because it's important, because there's only like a short window, and to make a permanent decision that does, because at that point the emotions that they're feeling, is despair, shame, guilt, that it doesn't relate to reality, but if the emotions are still there no matter what I tell the person. So I do encourage those people who are like, well, I'm up to here. Well, you're not Superman. If you're the parent, if your mom, your spouse, get help. I had to go through just understanding that I didn't have the skills to know what to do to help people when I was young, and I lost some people who completed suicide. It was my ability to forgive myself and move past that, but also understand that when we understand that we're just a human, we're more willing to get more people involved, more community, because at the end of the day, mental health or whatever it is, it's important because the person we're talking about, whoever you're thinking about at this moment. I just want to, I know we kind of went on a tangent there, but I do feel it's important when we think about our lessons, when we think about today, and I do appreciate you being on, Sebastian. I just want to ask, as we wrap up, any final thoughts as we kind of wrap up on this? Just touch upon remembering our lessons. Anything you want to add or to emphasize from what we've talked about?
I think remembering is very important. we see it in that's why we have holidays, right? National holidays. We remember a lot of things. You mentioned a lot of things that we remember, whether it be wars, or victories, independence days, and whatnot, birthdays, right? We live in a society as humans that it's important to remember. And I think it's something, going into maybe the spiritual realm a little bit, that I believe God has put in our hearts to do, because it's important to look back, to be able to have confidence looking forward, right? You look at a military, right? If you have not had as a military any victories or improvements, right, and you have no memory at all, you're just going presently, you would go into every war unsure about how you would do, right? But because you can look back and see, no, we've done great. Our military has gotten better. Same thing with a sports team, right? If you had no track record of being good, of winning or whatever, and you couldn't remember and have any memory of it, then you would be unsure, right? Whereas, sometimes having a bad memory will stump you and say, I'm only this good. I'm not good enough, right? So it's a double-edged sword, but I think processing through how we remember, what we remember, and what we allow to really mold us. I think everything that we are makes us who we are, right? Everything we face, whether good or bad, has brought us to here, whether we've enjoyed it or not, whether we've liked it or not, whether it's been done to us or hasn't been done, whatever we've decided or not. We're here. And so it's important to look back and remember and just think, I just think it's like, just kind of meditating on your past life and seeing in the sense of your previous days leading up to this moment. How did I get here, right? What decisions, what choices did I make? What were made for me or whatever it is, and see that, hey, I'm here today and I can have confidence for tomorrow because I've seen that whether I believe in a superpower or not, I've been able to make it through, and here I am. Yeah, I struggle and have things, but I can keep going, right? So I think it's very important to remember our lessons. God is a God that remembers. Throughout the Bible, we see he many times says that he remembers the promises he had made or a covenant. And usually for God, when he says he remembers, it means that he's going to act and do something, right? Not that he forgets. It's just like, all right, yeah, I'm going to come and work on your behalf and whatnot. So remembering, I think, is very important. And I think it's something that we should all be doing, especially as we're in the journey, right? Some of us may be in journeys of fitness, right? And it can be so hard to look in the mirror every day and say, I'm not improving. I'm taking all the supplements they told me I'm eating. I'm not eating the cake that they told me not to eat. I'm working out. But that remembering part is looking back at maybe your first picture of this 90 days you've been on already, or maybe half a year already, and saying, look, I'm not the same I was in January, right? I don't have the same cravings. I can lift more weight. I can run more. I can have more stamina. So looking back is that remembering of I've come a further away than I thought I would, and look at me. I'm proud of myself. I'm happy with where I'm at. I'm not where I want to be, but I'm happy where I'm at. And so I think that would be my context there, just framing that and remembering more often, right? I think the past can be very difficult for many, especially like you mentioned. Many have gone through very traumatic experiences that's very painful and hurtful and very hard and dark to look back into. And at the same time, you can look back and try to process through that so that you don't repeat that in the future, so that you don't do that for others, so that you can find some hope and say, hey, look, I've been able to overcome all that I went through, and look where I am today, right? So those are my 2 cents on remembering.
And I want to just, when I think about our lessons and our remembering, I also, it's just like you said, we forget all the lengths, all the progress we made, because we're just we're hypercritical. There's a lot of these negative cognitive distortions that we could say. It's not, we all have them, but remembering that you are valued just by what you may, if a lot of times we put so much emphasis on a title, a work, or our progress, or how well we do as the value. And a lot of times I leave this last example is, I remember one person really struggling, having medical issues, and it used to take him one day to swoop in and do the lawn. No problem. But now it takes them multiple days, and he just feels more of a burden. He's like, I just feel less valued. I'm like, if I were to take your mom here and I'll talk to her and I say, is your son less valued because it takes some extra days? And he knows, but the fact of the matter is we're hard to forgive ourselves at the point. We're very much hard to allow ourselves because we don't feel we're enough unless we're progressing. I would say we're enough because who we are, like who we're trying to become, and allowing ourselves that space and that safe space. And if you get there and you're doing well, don't forget the lessons you learn, to be hypercritical of those who are still struggling where you were at. Be kind at the very same time. There's a quote I'm going to say again at the end as we wrap up, but it's a French proverb. I like this. Good advice is often annoying. Bad advice never is. It's interesting to think about because a lot of times we want to hear what we want to hear, but at the same time, be kind. People are like, oh, I don't know what to do. Just, at the same time, Rome wasn't built in one day. Lessons take time to understand. We have a lot of information. It's a different time period. There's a saturation of information. The problem is taking the time. Well, not the problem. The hope is we take the time to understand it all. Thank you so much for coming on, Sebastian. And
thanks, Rob. Appreciate you.
I remember.
I think it's great conversation. Thank you. No. Just thanking you for the time.
No problem. And remember to stay updated with Revive Ministries through various platforms. ReviveMinistries.com is the website. Like I said, the leaving the last quote, I just kind of spoil it, but good advice is often annoying. Bad advice never is. That's good.